Hi philosophers. This particular video is if you're interested in Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, this question about the social contract, what that's for, and whether or not we have natural rights. So both Locke and Hobbes are part of this tradition called the social contract tradition. And that particular philosophical tradition within political philosophy attempts to answer the most basic question of why do we have government at all, right? Why do we justify giving up our freedoms, right, to a state to govern us in some way, even if we have a say, right, in some form of democratic participation? We're still giving up some freedoms to protect others, right, or other liberties. So I want to just walk us through really quickly Hobbes versus Locke. So they both participate in this heuristic or this idea of what would the state of nature be like without government, and then try to work out what the justification for any social contract would be, right? And so the social contract sort of stands in for why we agree on a daily basis to participate, right, within our polis, right, within the state, within the government that can control, right, some of our freedoms in order to protect others. Now, at the end of this, you can also look into the Digging Deeper Extra Credit, and there's a critique of the social contract tradition by Martha Nussbaum, who's a feminist philosopher, and she goes after this state of nature, which is where Hobbes and Locke both begin to talk about what would it look like if we actually had a more accurate representation of all people within the state of nature, and not just able-bodied adult men. Would we come up with a different kind of social contract? So if you're interested in a feminist critique that sort of brings in other kinds of bodies in the state of nature, you can check out her video and write a reflection on that. So Hobbes really starts out our state of nature social contract tradition. And so you get that in this big, thick book called The Leviathan. And Leviathan was actually this sort of sea monster type thing, this sort of representative for the state, right? And the state is the thing that sort of controls all of us in some way, that we give up to the state certain freedoms. And so he had to ask, why should we do that at all? So for Hobbes, he looked at what would the state of nature be like if we had no government. And for him, it was quite simply that it would be nasty, brutish, and short. So this goes back to his idea of human nature, which is actually a kind of ethical but also metaphysical stance, right? What are human beings like, right, at our core? And so he thought without any government, without a social contract, that human beings, and here he was really talking about able-bodied adult men, would just be out for themselves. It would be all against all, right? There is no property. There's nothing to stop you except for, the brute force of another person protecting, right, food, whatever else, protecting their own body, whatever they were able to gain. So there's no property in the state of nature for Hobbes. There is no, what you would call, no natural rights. I don't have a right to anything, right? To my own body, right? To the little hut that I might build, to any food, anything that I might gain or make, right? None of that. I don't have a natural right to any of that. So he thought the most rational thing to do for a human being, right? And where I'm not doing this for other people, remember, I'm doing this for me because of my own kind of selfish human nature, is to actually enter into a contract where I do give up ultimate freedom, right, in order to live a longer life, to flourish, right? So that is the exchange, right? I can either live in a state of nature with no restrictions, or I can enter into a social contract, give up some of my freedoms, and then get protection, right? So now I can have property, and then the state protects that if somebody else tries to come and take it. I can have my own life, right? Various things that we take for granted. Okay, so in exchange for freedoms, we get those rights and protections. Now, for Hobbes, right, the next step is to say, how do you protect that social contract, right? Again, given people's human nature, he thought you needed something, right, someone who was in some sense outside of that system to actually protect it, right? So he called it a sovereign. He's ultimately arguing for a particular form of monarchy when you have a sovereign who we hope, right, is good and looking out for everybody else, but has to be in some ways above the law or outside the law in order to enforce it, right? So if we can go changing the social contract, right, willy-nilly, right, whenever we want to, then he doesn't think it's stable. He doesn't think it has the backing, right? So there is a sense of violence behind the social contract that is always that threat that keeps the social contract and the promise of it intact, right? So if I don't actually believe that the government is going to protect my property or my life or whatever, and if other people don't believe that, then it may not hold. So that was his fear. And he is also responding in particular to his time, right? Where at the time you have in Europe not stable borders, a lot of war between what will eventually become nation states. Now along you have comes Locke, right? And for Locke, right, he's going to be one of the most influential thinkers for the United States and for what becomes our representative democracy. So in his two treatises of government, he starts in the same place, right, thinking about what the state of nature would be like, and says, actually, there we do have natural rights, right? They're divinely given. And so you see that, right, in the Declaration of Independence, that we have these certain inalienable rights, right, meaning that we have them just by being born, right? By being a human being, you have certain rights, life, liberty, right? And even the idea of property, which is something that would be interesting to think about and debate. Is property something that is a natural right? So for Locke, right, we have these natural rights in the state of human nature. He doesn't have as grim of a view of human nature as Hobbes does, but he does think that we need some kind of organization, right, some way of protecting those rights. And so for him, that's the need for the social contract. So when we enter into those, to protect those rights that we already have, right, to have some sort of, in many ways, bureaucracy, right, surrounding those rights to make sure that they are protected. So Locke, like I said, is going to be one of the main thinkers from Europe who influences founding fathers in the United States, and is used to argue for democracy. So democracy, in part, is this response to how do we protect our rights if those in power, right, are stomping all over them. Okay, what do we do? Right, so we need some form of accountability for our leaders, and that's what democracy for him does. So if you watch the other video on Plato and democracy, this is one argument you could make, is that we have these natural rights, and democracy is that check, that accountability to those in power. Okay? It also paves the way for civil disobedience, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in another video connected to Martin Luther King and his requirements for civil disobedience. But again, because our rights are natural, right, and divinely given, at least for this train of thinkers, right, Locke through King, because those are sort of divinely given, and there's natural rights and there's a natural law outside of human law. Anytime human law contradicts with natural law and thus our natural rights, right, given to us as human beings, we have we're not only allowed, but we actually should be compelled to not obey those laws and to change them. And we can change them through democratic means. If that's not working, there is also the option to engage in civil disobedience, to draw attention to these laws that are unjust, right? Because they violate natural law, they violate our natural rights. So look for that as another video if you're interested in that. And you can definitely write a really good essay given what's in the textbook between Hobbes and Locke on this question of natural rights, or you can even pair it as what is the purpose of the social contract, right? So they have a little bit, some distinction there between, is it, right, to give us the rights, or is it to protect the rights that we already have? Okay. So I hope this is helpful to some of you who are thinking about natural rights, who are thinking about even civil disobedience, and then also as a carryover from that democracy video.